for joining today. So the presentation today is called Detective Oxygen Forensic Detective from a Practitioner Viewpoint. And to give you a little bit of an introduction to myself, I've been at Oxygen for about 2 years in the solutions architect and product advocate role. But before that, I did digital forensics as a practitioner for quite a long time, sort of 14 years or thereabouts. And I did that. I started out in the UK military doing digital forensics, and then went to UK government agencies, usually still doing digital forensics, mobile, computer, drone, lots and lots of different types of forensics, usually still in support of the UK military. This presentation, which is from a practitioner's viewpoint, is really just, I want to describe how I started using Detective. And the things about Detective that I liked the most. We're very much aware that digital forensics is a toolbox industry. There is no single tool that will do everything. So, most organizations will have 2 or 3 or maybe even 5 or 6 different tools to do, mobile forensics or computer forensics. And the organization that I worked in, we had access to all of the tools. We really did have pretty much all of the tools. So I do have some understanding about where I think Detective fits, and where it can be useful for people that already have, some tools in their toolbox. So I'll just have a couple of quick slides right at the very start, which just describes what Detective is for anybody who hasn't seen or used Detective before. Detective is our program that does extraction of data from various different data sources, whether it's computers or the cloud or mobile devices. And it's also our analysis tool. So Detective is a tool for extraction from those different data sources and analysis as well. And you can do that analysis in a unified manner, which is something else that I'm going to talk about as we go through the presentation. The next slide is just talking about a few of the capabilities. There are quite a lot of things in Detective. It's a very big tool with a lot of features. So for example, it has the device extractor, which can extract data from phones. It has Key Scout, which can extract data from computers, and the cloud extractor for cloud sources. It can also import data for analysis from lots and lots of different sources, whether they're warrant returns or CDR or the account downloads, things like the Google Takeout or Snapchat My Data. And then it has that data analysis engine as well. So not just parsing and decoding, but also analytics, things like speech to text transcription, which was added actually in the last release. Offline translation of 32 languages we're up to at the moment, malware detection, facial recognition, lots and lots of other analytics as well. So the agenda for today is a quick overview of Detective, which I've already done really. And then, like I said, I want to talk about where I use Detective the most as a practitioner. And there really are too many features to talk about. So I'm going to hopefully talk about maybe 5 or 6 key features. Should take 30 or maybe 40 minutes. So we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So just some of the things that I found to be the most useful when I had a big toolbox with all of the tools inside it. So the first one is actually a very quick overview of 2 of our extraction methods. I've talked about these extraction methods in a previous webinar, so apologies if this is something that you do already know about, but it's something that I do want to talk about because I think one of Detective's main strengths, probably the main strength of Detective, is actually on the analysis side, but we do have a niche for extraction. And even when you look at all of the other tools, that do extraction, we are, I think, better at some types of device than those other tools. We're not a grey key, we're not a Celebrite Premium, we're not getting into locked iPhones, but actually there are some types of devices, some types of Android devices that we do a really, really good job of getting into if they're locked, and getting full file systems from them, whether they're locked or unlocked. And 2 of those types of device are actually MediaTek and Unisoc devices. So MediaTek and Unisoc, we have a method for each of those inside our device extractor. If you haven't seen our device extractor before, It looks like this, and we have different methods for different types of devices, Unisoc and MediaTek being two of those methods for those types of devices. What are MediaTek and Unisoc? They are chipset makers, so they make the silicon actually inside your phones, so also known as system on chips or chipsets more commonly. It's really the processor inside your phone plus a load of other stuff as well. They make them for phones, they make them for smartphones, they also make them for feature phones. We have smartphone support for Unisoc and MediaTek. We currently have feature phone support for MediaTek, but actually we are adding feature phone support for Unisoc probably in the next release, or if not in the next release, then very soon afterwards. And they make them for other things as well. You know, they make them for embedded devices, infotainment systems. They're very, very common chipsets. They do have a slightly lower price point than other chipsets like Qualcomm, which means that they're a little bit more common in some of those budget devices. But actually, in recent years, MediaTek have started to move into some of those mid-tier devices. And they are the biggest chipset maker for Android devices. If you look at the orange up at the top is actually the MediaTek market share. They have about 1/3 of the global market share. Now, obviously, this will change from country to country. They're going to be a little bit more popular in developing markets, places like Asia and the Middle East and Africa. But actually, they are very popular in Europe as well. And if we look at the market share for Unisoc, they also have quite a big market share, which has grown hugely. So this graph on the left, the pink is the Unisoc market share. And you can see that around 2020, 2021, it exploded from maybe a couple of percent for smartphone chipsets up to, you know, maybe 15, 20% of all the new smartphones having Unisoc chipsets. And actually, we can see that if we go on, you know, any Media Mart or Media Expert or any of those shops that sell electronics, if we look at all of the phones between 100 and 175 euros, about half of them are MediaTek and about the other half are Unisoc with, you know, a few Qualcomms and Exynos in there. And actually those Qualcomm and Exynos devices are probably not new devices. They're probably slightly older devices that have gone down in price. You know, pretty much all of the new devices that are at that price point are going to be MediaTek or Unisoc. So super, super common chipsets. Unisoc have really increased their market share in recent years. A lot of the lower end Samsungs, like the A series, the F series, the M series, Samsung devices will have MediaTek or possibly even Unisoc. Pretty much all of the new lower end Nokias and Motorolas will have Unisoc chipsets. A lot of the Xiaomi devices have MediaTek chipsets. So they're really, really popular. So I'm not going to go into too much detail in this presentation. I just wanted to highlight where we have a really good extraction capability that, in my experience, you know, if you have a locked iPhone, you're not going to plug that into Detective. You're going to plug that into Grey Key or Premium. But in my experience, if you have a locked or even unlocked Unisoc or MediaTek, but Unisoc in particular, I did find Detective to be much more effective at being able to recover the password and also get the full file system than, you know, some of those very expensive premium tools. So the way that we do that is we do a physical extraction, we do hardware key extraction, and then we actually do the decryption offline. That allows us to do password recovery for, you know, devices that are running full disk encryption and secure start, where you do need to recover the password. You cannot just bypass the user password. So we can do that recovery offline with password recovery attempts like dictionary attacks or brute force attacks. All more commonly for newer devices that are running file-based encryption, where we do also need to recover the password to decrypt the device. You can do password recovery again on those types of devices. This method, it doesn't actually matter if the device is in AFU mode. You will have to switch the device off anyway to do these types of extractions. So the device will start from a BFU mode anyway, and that doesn't really matter with this extraction method because we have the hardware keys. we can do that offline decryption just by those password recovery attacks. And it is GPU accelerated. So for a 6-digit PIN code, if you've got a good GPU in your workstation, you could expect for file-based encryption, anywhere between maybe 5 or 10 or maybe even 15,000 attempts per second. So if it's a 6-digit PIN, it will be very, very quick. If it's alphanumeric, it will obviously be slower and you will need a good dictionary attack. But actually, you have much more chance than doing a brute force on the device, which is going to be much slower. Because this is offline, we can do GPU accelerated brute force or dictionary attacks, etc., etc. So I have one or two more extraction methods that I would like to talk about before I go into some of the analytics in Detective. And one of those extraction methods is actually called the Android agent. Now, this is a logical extraction method, and I will say that I never liked doing logical extractions. I always wanted to get the full file system extraction if I could, but for some devices, we just can't get full file systems from every device. So sometimes we have to fall back to these logical extraction methods. This is a method that is actually useful in the lab or in the field, and I'll explain the reason for that in a moment. Now, normally with logical extraction methods, it's normally quite difficult to get data from third-party applications. Normally, to get data from applications with logical methods, we have to do APK downgrade, which most tools have APK downgrade. Detective has it as well. It is a useful tool, but APK downgrade does come with some risk. I never liked to do APK downgrade because it can be risky. You are modifying the device. It isn't that well supported anymore. There are quite a lot of newer devices that just won't support the APK downgrade process. And like I said, it does come with some risks. So normally with the logical extraction method that uses an agent, and most vendors will use an agent as part of their logical extraction, whether they tell you or not. An agent is just an application that's installed on the device. Now, in Android and the way that the Android security mechanisms and the Android framework work, we have this app sandboxing. That means one application, such as the agent, because the agent is just an application, cannot access a different application's data. So you can give an application permissions for certain things like the contacts, the call logs, the text messages, the media files, but you cannot give an application permission to access WhatsApp's data directly or Telegram's data directly. So that's the reason that we normally would have to do an APK downgrade to capture some data from those applications. But actually, the Android agent in Detective is a little bit different because it has some extra options that do allow for extraction of data from those third-party applications. The way that you can do that with the Android agent is that you can actually just install it as an application and use it as an application on the device. I'm going to jump out of the presentation for a moment, and hopefully I can show you this live. This is a feature that not everybody knows about. When I first tried to use this feature a few years back, it took me a while to figure out how to actually do this extraction of third-party data. So I'm going to jump into the device extractor just for a moment in Detective and show you actually how this works. So this is the Android agent method within the device extractor. And you can see here that you have this option of doing an extraction through USB. If you do a USB extraction, the data that you will get will be a standard logical extraction. And what I mean by standard is that you'll get the contacts and the call logs and the media files and the text messages, but you won't get application data. But there is another way of using this. So on this little notification here where it says if you need to extract the data unavailable in the auto extraction mode, please do it manually via Android agent. And this is actually a link that will take you to the folder that the actual application for the Android agent is stored. Now, the idea is that you can put this onto a thumb drive or an SD card, or you can install this via USB. But you could put that on a thumb drive or SD card and plug that into a device and install this application agent manually. I'm actually sharing the screen from a phone that I have on my desk, where I have installed the Android agent, and you can see down in the bottom left, it just shows up as an application. If I go into that, there's four different options there. So the first option, if I click on that, is actually the same data that you get from a USB extraction, but you can do it to the SD card or the thumb drive that's plugged into the phone. So you can see here that it's the text messages, it's the media files, etc., etc. But it won't actually be application data. It will just be the native data. The second option just allows you to do some automated screenshots and screen recordings. But the third option is the one that I want to talk about. So this extract third-party applications option, it includes 18, popular chat applications or web browsers. And the way that it collects data from these is different for all of them. It may use things like accessibility settings, automated screenshots and OCR. It may use chat export options if they already exist within those applications. If I go into WhatsApp, for example, I get some more options about what I want to collect. So just calls or just chats or just all data. And if I go into all data, you can, specific chats to extract. You can configure the options about what you want to extract. And then if I hit start, that will just open up the WhatsApp application and start to collect data from that automatically. So it's kind of what we would call a skin deep extraction. It's more or less what you can see inside the application is what you will get. So this is not the same data that you would get from a full file system extraction. It will be slightly different to what you would get from even an APK downgrade, but it is less risky than an APK downgrade. Sometimes I would use this method and then do an APK downgrade afterwards. So if that went wrong, at least I had some data from WhatsApp. Or whichever application it was that I wanted to extract. And it really just automates kind of a manual analysis of each of these applications. You could go into each of these different menus and do screenshots, but then you would just be left with, 1,000 screenshots or 5,000 screenshots to try and piece together. This will do all of that automatically, and it will put it into an extraction that you can open as a normal extraction inside Detective. So I found this quite useful in the lab when I couldn't get full file systems from devices because maybe it just wasn't supported with any of the tools. But actually, this is quite useful in the field setting as well. We have some users in the UK who use this as a triage tool when they go and visit known offenders. So people who've committed crimes previously, sometimes they go and do house visits, and actually they use this Android agent as a way of doing quick kind of triage extractions from their devices. There's also an organization I think it's in Austria that uses this. It's a human trafficking, anti-human trafficking agency that, again, they go into safe houses and things like that where there's loads and loads of people and they don't know who is bad and who is a victim. So again, this can be used as a kind of triage tool, because you don't need a license to use the Android agent. You can put this agent onto as many thumb drives or SD cards as you like and do extraction from multiple phones at the same time. You do need to import the results into Detective to view that for analysis, but you don't actually need a license to actually use this agent on a device. And I think I do have an Android agent extraction from WhatsApp in my extractions somewhere. So I've got quite a few extractions here. So bear with me. I'm just going to try and find it just to give you an idea of what this extraction looks like once it's finished. And I do have one. Apologies. So here is an example of an Android agent extraction just for WhatsApp. It's actually a different device to the one that I just did. But if I go into the WhatsApp section, it's just kind of broken out, in the view that you see here, just the normal view for a WhatsApp style extraction. So really, really quite a useful thing, even though I know that what we always want to get is full file system extractions, but sometimes we just can't get full file system extractions. one thing that I've added to this presentation actually, and this is not something that I was able to use when I was using Detective as a practitioner because it wasn't in the tool yet, is actually a new method that I wanted to talk about quite briefly. We added it in version 17, and it really did actually improve the full file system method in Detective for Android extractions. So in version 17 of Detective, we added this update that said, added the ability to extract the full file system from unlocked Android devices running Android OS 9 to 14, security patch level no later than June 2024. So this is actually a really, really recent security patch level. A lot of Android devices will be susceptible to this method. Now, it isn't actually quite a full file system, but what it does do is it allows you to extract all the app data from Android devices that have that security patch level or less. So it's an extremely wide range of support. This is actually a bug in the Android framework, so many devices will be susceptible to this. And I said that it's not a full file system. It's not a true full file system, but it does allow you to extract all of the application data. So it says here, the exploit allows extracting user application data, but actually full file system extraction is not supported. It used to be the case that if if you couldn't get a full file system from a device, you would use something like APK downgrade or maybe the Android agent that I've just shown you. But actually, this is a new option which is dependent on a vulnerability being present, but it's a very recent vulnerability in terms of it being patched. And actually, this sits somewhere in between an Android agent extraction and a full file system extraction, because this is the raw data, this is the databases from all of those applications. So if a full file system extraction is a 100% solution, maybe the Android agent is a 30% solution. Maybe you get what you need from the Android agent. Maybe you just need some WhatsApp messages, but it's not a full file system. It's maybe a 30% solution. This is actually something in between the Android agent or an APK downgrade and a full file system. I would say this is closer to an 80% solution. So it's not all of the system files, but it should be all of the application data. And it's very, very generic. This is not a bug or a vulnerability in some specific hardware or a specific Linux kernel. This is actually a bug in Android itself. So any device that has security patch level less than June 2024, this should actually work. So I just wanted to talk about this very quickly, even though it's not normally part of this presentation, because I think that is actually quite a big deal. And actually the full file system method in Detective is really, really good now that this has been added to it. But it's worth understanding that it's not quite a full file system, but it's pretty much all of the application, or it is all of the application data. So super, super useful. So on to the next bit, which is a little bit more of extraction and analysis. We do have some integrated computer forensics in Detective. And again, I've already done a full webinar and a full presentation about this, but I just wanted to touch on this briefly because this is something that I found really, really useful. So we have a tool called KeyScout, which is part of Detective. You don't have to purchase it separately. It's a part of Detective, and that does targeted collections from either a live system, an image file if you have an EO1 or a DD or even a virtual machine image file. There's loads of supported image files, or a physical drive, and it collects data from Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And it collects things like application and system artifacts. It can do some memory analysis. It looks for mobile backups. It can also collect credentials for cloud extractions. And that's actually the reason that it's called KeyScout. And the analysis, once you've done those extractions, is done in Detective. There was also a recent update to Detective and KeyScout that there was a new module called KeyDiver, which allows for things like password recovery, not just for BitLocker, but also things like File Vault or Veracrypt and a few other types of encrypted artifacts as well. So this is what KeyScout looks like when you open it from Detective. And the first thing to note is that you can actually run this against a live system. So you can put KeyScout onto a hard drive and plug it into a running computer and collect data live. And actually quite a lot of our users use Keyscout for this. Some of them just use it to collect credentials for cloud extractions that they want to do on scene. Other people use it to do more of a general triage. Again, people that might go and visit known offenders, and they just need to do a quick triage against their machine to see if they've been doing anything that they shouldn't have been with their computers. But it can also be used in the lab, against those image files or file system archives or physical disks. I did a combination, to be honest. I quite often in the lab, I would have image files. So I would have an EO1 or a DD image, and I would use Keyscout just against the image. But actually, even in the lab, it can be quite useful against live systems. Sometimes I would get a laptop and I would take it out of the Faraday bag and open it up, and it would still be switched on. And I remember I had, a MacBook that was like that, and I didn't really want to switch that off before I did that image, the physical image, because there was loads and loads of stuff open. There was loads of browser windows open. There was documents open, loads and loads of things. So I just did a live system collection with Keyscout before I switched it off to be able to capture any of those things that might have disappeared after I switched off the MacBook to take a full physical image. So can be used in the lab or in the field with that combination of different ways of running it. And it works. It does a search based on a profile, and it collects data based on that profile. So, this is just a couple of screens from the profile configurator for Keyscout, and you can have different profiles. You can save profiles. You can share profiles. And so under the applications tab, you can see there are a lot of different applications that it supports collection of data from. There's about 90 in there at the moment. It's things like web browsers, chat applications, even things like image viewers or file sharing applications, lots and lots of different applications for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And also system artifacts. I really like the way that Keyscout both collects system artifacts, so things like from Windows registry or event logs or prefetch or bash history for Linux. I really like the way it collects it, but I also like the way that the system artifacts data is presented in Detective when you do the analysis. It groups all of the different system artifacts into different categories. For example, it will create a category or a section that is application traces or network activity, and then it will put the relevant system artifacts into each of those sections, and then you can view a nice timeline for each of those sections in Detective, built up of those different types of system artifacts. Once you've done a search across whatever you're doing, this was actually across a Windows 11 virtual machine image. You can create a physical image, but actually I found Keyscout, probably the best use of that is just to collect that application and system data. So it's found, 81 different application artifacts or system artifacts. So the found data size is about 5 gigabytes. It's also found some passwords and some mobile backups and some other things. Once you've done that search, you can choose what you save or choose what you export into Detective. So you can either export directly into Detective, or you can save it to an extraction that you can then import into Detective afterwards. This is just a very quick screenshot of the key diver. So things like BitLocker are supported in Keyscout as well. You can just put in a password or a recovery key to decrypt a BitLockered partition. Or if it's a partition that doesn't use TPM and it just has a password, you can also use a password, and you can do password recovery with the key diver module as well, which is GPU accelerated password recovery. And that is a part of Detective as well. It's built into Detective. This is what a Keyscout extraction actually looks like when you've imported that into Detective. So you can see here, this is the desktop extraction that I did across that Windows 11 virtual machine from the previous screenshots. And you can see here that it just looks like any other extraction. So we have these different sections, and these applications are the Windows versions of those applications because they came from a Keyscout extraction. And then we have the system artifacts down here as well, which I was talking about. It groups these into different sections. So user activity will be things like prefetch. It will also be things like the user assist and various different things that point to user activity, application traces again. So it groups all of those together in a nice way that you can view those in a timeline view as well. And I'm going to go into some of the analytics a little bit more as we go through this presentation. So just to give you an example of what a key scout extraction looks like inside Detective. So moving on to more of the analysis side of Detective, I want to talk about data-based analysis of multiple data sources. So the first thing to talk about, and there's really two features here, is the database feature. So this is quite a boring but a really, really important feature. And this was really, really important to me. When I started to do more digital forensics in Europe, you know, my last couple of years doing digital forensics, I was more Europe based. Before that, I was in places like the Middle East or Africa. But when I started to do more in Europe, I started to see much bigger devices. So I started to see, you know, iPhones with 200 gigabytes of data, or, you know, even Androids that had hundreds of gigabytes of data. But I saw a lot of iPhones actually, and to be honest, I was using Grey Key most of the time to do those extractions back then. And I was, you know, trying to load these huge extractions into analysis tools, and it was taking a very, very long time to load in the main tool that I was using at the time. You know, the first device that I did on that particular job was a big iPhone. It took about 18 hours to load in a different tool. And then once I tried to export a report, it just crashed, and I had to start reloading it again. So in Detective is very, very fast at loading data. It's one of the things that got me using Detective for analysis, because I just needed something that would load data more quickly. And actually, pretty much everybody tells us that Detective is very fast at processing. I was in Austria last week, and somebody said, yeah, 200 gigabyte iPhone loaded in 3 hours in Detective versus I think they said 3 days for a different tool. So it is very fast at processing data, but also it's really important that we have actually a database model. And what I mean by that is when you load data into Detective, when it processes the data and pulls out the files and decodes the applications, it puts all of that data into a database that lives on your machine, or you can put that database wherever you like. And what that means that is if you close Detective and reopen Detective, all of the data that you had loaded before will still be there until you delete it from the database. And it also means that your work is preserved. So when you add tags, or when you mark things as key evidence, or you add notes, all of that is preserved inside the database as well. So you can open and close Detective as much as you like, and you will still have all of your work there. The other interesting thing about this is that you can have more than one database. So a lot of people will create a different database for each case. And the other interesting thing that you can do with this is if you put that database on a centralized location. So if you have a network share, for example, that has that database, you know, for each case, anybody else who can see that network share and who also has Detective or even the free viewer can also open your database. So if somebody else in the office just wants to have a quick look at, you know, something inside your case, they can actually point Detective at your database, and when they open Detective, they'll see all of the stuff that you had in your database. And I can show you an example of this really, really quickly. So at the moment, the database that I'm using is just the default database, which is here. But I do have another database which I just created inside my documents folder, and you can put this anywhere. So if I, you know, at the moment I have all of these many extractions inside this database, but if I change to a different database and press update, that will just restart Detective. And when Detective restarts, there will be the other extractions that I had in that different database. So we'll just give Detective a moment to reopen. And what you'll see is I think I only have one extraction in the other database. So give it a second to open up. I heard a bing, nor was that a question in the chat? So this is a different database. It only has one extraction inside it, but you can see that you can kind of instantly switch between those different databases with those different extractions in. And anybody could view this database. Anybody that can see this folder that has detective or the viewer can actually view the data in that database. So really flexible, really kind of a boring feature, but so useful, very useful. And just whilst detectives are opening up, I'm going to go back into the presentation. So that kind of brings me on to the next thing. You can import many types of data into detective. You can import mobile devices, not just from our extractor. You can also import, Celebrite extractions, grey key extractions, X or Y extractions, loads and loads of different formats. You can import computer data through Keyscout, so you can get data from computers in there, from Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. Cloud, there's 109 cloud services, I think, in the cloud extractor, so you can get cloud data in there. But also things like downloaded accounts data, you can import those into detective. Things like the Google Takeout, Snapchat My Data, and a few other ones. The same with warrant returns. We have a number of different warrant returns that you can import into detective. You can import data from vehicles. So, for example, if you have a burglar extraction, you can import that into detective as well. And also things like CDR returns. So the idea is that you can get as many types of data into detective at the same time. And you can do analytics across all of those devices in a case. So analytics being things like, the search, the timeline, the social graph. Once, if you have a case with computers, mobile phones, cloud extractions, warrant returns, the idea is that you can view all of that together. So you could have a timeline with all of the data from those different sources in a single place. And that kind of brings me on to the timeline. So I want to show you a little bit of, I think we have a really nice timeline, actually. And again, like I said before, this can be multiple sources. So this could be computers, cloud, phones, vehicle, etc., etc. And the timeline is just one of the analytics that we have. And I think it kind of describes the UI in detective quite nicely. There are many filters in the timeline, but we in detective, we normally have a set of filters in the left-hand column that you can see here. We usually have content in the middle, and then we normally have some details about that content over on the right-hand side. There are lots of other filters inside the timeline, actually. So you can also filter just on things like messages. There's activity matrix filters and time filters down on the bottom. And we also have some smart filters that allow you to do things like show a minute before and after everything that has this tag, or show, 100 events before and after everything that has this tag. You can configure how you filter on the timeline. One of the recent additions to detective in the past 6 months or so is the addition of translation. So we're up to 32 languages at the moment. So again, if you just want to go to the timeline and translate all of those messages, that's something that you could do by going to the messages tab and then going over to the translations. And this is the timeline viewer. It's just an example really of what I was talking about, having that multiple data sources inside a single case. And you can put as many devices as you like into a case inside detective. So this is the timeline from a case where actually I had some computer data, so we can see some Discord messages from a desktop extraction that was done through Keyscout. But also we've got, data from a mobile phone, and there could also be data from cloud sources, pretty much everything that you might need in there. So that's really one of the strengths and the power of detective, is having that ability to import lots and lots of different data sources. And actually, I just want to jump back into detective again for a moment to talk a little bit more about that. So if we go to the homepage, you can see we have this import option, and obviously you can import our extractions, but it's not just our extractions. So we have grey key import, we have Celebrite UFED import, X or Y, different data sources from drones, from computers. Also the downloaded accounts data, things that we support are the ones that you see here, and for warrant returns as well. And then there is also that ability to bring in CDR records with the call data expert as well. And you really can pretty much put as many devices in a case as you like. So if I go to this case, there's currently 12 devices in here. and it's a mixture of vehicle, desktop, cloud, CDR, really a mixture of absolutely everything. And this is where you can do that timeline across an entire case, or maybe you want to do the social graph across an entire case. So there's a huge amount of flexibility doing this on a case level. You don't have to create a case when you load devices into Detective, but if you do create a case, you will get much more out of the tool. And you can just drag and drop devices between the different cases. It's very, very simple to do. So just to jump back into the presentation, and I've just got one or two more slides, I think. So I really, really like the way that we do searching as well. The search again is fast in Detective, but you also have a lot of flexibility where you search, and you can do a lot of different types of searches. So you can do things like regular text searches or keyword searches, or even searches based on hashes. And you can choose where you search. So you can just choose to search inside the parsed data, or you can choose to search everywhere, or you can choose to search inside certain file types. So, maybe you just want to do a regular expression inside databases to look for certain things. We had a case, it was a UK case actually, it was a UK police department that was investigating mail fraud. So what people were doing was they were basically changing mailing receipts, and they were able to commit a type of fraud with that. And the way that they were doing it is they were taking photos of the receipts and then using like a Photoshop application to actually change the numbers on the receipts. So these phones had thousands of photos of these receipts, and they just needed to find all of the numbers and photos that had been changed. And the way that they actually did that, they did use Detective, and they said that it saved them a huge amount of time. They did a search inside just the OCR results, and they actually combined that with a regular expression that looked for that particular mailing receipt number format, and it was able to pull out pretty much all of the results that they needed. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you do searches. But one of the cool search types that you can also do is you can search for faces. So facial recognition is just one of the analytics in Detective. There's lots and lots of analytics, things like speech to text, OCR, facial rec, image categorization, etc., etc. But if you do run facial recognition on a device, it will pull out all of the faces, and then you can choose to import your own face. So if you have a picture of somebody, maybe you've got a picture of somebody from Facebook, or maybe you just have a picture of somebody from a different source, you can load that into Detective as a face set, and you can have more than one picture inside a face set. And then you can use that as a template to search across the faces that were on the device. So I loaded Bill Murray into a picture that I found on the internet into a face set, and then did a search across the devices inside this case, and it showed up on a couple of those devices, or on this device, as there was a picture of Bill Murray on that device. So really, really flexible searching features. So that's kind of all that I want to show you, and I really just wanted to talk about the things that I found to be really, really useful in Detective. So certain extraction methods, certain devices, MediaTek Unisoc, using the Android agent, or maybe that new full file system method. Certain things around computers, so being able to extract and import computer data. But really, the main thing for me is both the speed of the translation, the speed of the processing, the fact that it's data-based and the work is preserved, but also, not just the quality of the decoding, which is very high, but also the ability to import many, many types of data. So if you do have a case with lots and lots of different device types, you can view all of that in a single place. Computers, cloud, mobile devices, etc., etc. So when we talk to people, we always see that different people who have Detective use it for different things. Some people just use the cloud extractor. Some people just use it for MediaTek and Unisoc devices. Some people use it as their primary decoding tool. And there are some big organizations inside Europe, and I visited, that actually have decided to make Detective their primary decoding tool. So they take the feeds, they take the extractions from Graykey and Celebrite and all of the other tools, and load that into Detective to do that analysis piece partly due to the speed, but also partly due to the quality of the results, the analytics, and the ability to do multiple devices in a single case. So that's really kind of everything that I wanted to cover in this session. So I thank you very much, and I will take any questions if there are any.
Hi, Matt. I saw that one of the attendees was typing. He stopped.
Okay, don't be shy. Any questions at all, whether it's on absolutely anything?
Oh, it says, thank you a lot, Matt.
You're very welcome.
You're welcome.
Very welcome.
Then we will send you a follow-up email with the recording and with a short survey, 3-question survey to get your feedback, because we're always looking to improve the quality of our webinars. And see you soon.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Noor. Hello, hello, everybody. Thank you